r/AskReddit. What's the worst thing that you have encountered at church? I was probably 6 years old at the time. I had a bit of a tummy ache. So I cocked my leg up and farted on one of those old oak pews. Mid-prayer. It was not silent. The preacher responded, "I believe someone's had a movement of the spirit." That's not the worst. That's ducking hilarious. Was this preacher the Archbishop of Banterbury? Me and my wife, only dating at the time, were invited to my uncle's church. He was a relatively cool guy, so we agreed. It was one of those jumping around yelling churches, but we didn't mind because it's always nice to see people have that kind of passion for something. Eventually the sermon started and the preacher began talking about undignified churches or something and how there was someone present that was invited from one. He then described how they were sitting arms crossed and silent. Guess what me and my wife were doing? We left and I wasn't going to say anything because maybe I was just being paranoid. The first thing out her mouth was, "Did that dude just call us out?" TLDR. Went to a church where the preacher called us out because we went to a church he didn't like. It wasn't until I got much older that I realized a lot of people go to church just for the drama. It's for a church, honey. When my brother was like 4 or something, he stood up in the middle of the service and shouted boo-oring. At least he was honest. Well, he wasn't wrong. An older parishioner entered church and saw a young family sitting in her pew. She explained that she had been sitting in that very pew for years and asked them to find another, which they refused to do. When the pastor came over to intervene, she insisted that out of respect for her many years of church membership, they should be made to move. He told her, "Surely, you can welcome newcomers by being more accommodating." And she just took off in a rage, saying, "I'm leaving, and so is my substantial pledge." There's an episode of King of the Hill about exactly this. Which episode? A family that had been part of the church for about 70 years called the priest to perform last rites for their father who was dying. He informed them it was his off day, and to call someone else. What the hell? When my grandpa was sick, our priest came to visit him as often as he could. My grandpa couldn't remember much, but he sure could remember which days father was supposed to come visit. It meant a lot to him. I hope that man from your church was able to find peace and a more considerate priest. My grandmother's preacher pulled this when she passed. She was loyal member, volunteered in the nursery, and had been attending that church for over 40 years. She suddenly died and the preacher was at a conference. The conference was only a 4-hour drive away, but told my mother that he was not going to leave. This man knew my grandmother for 20 plus years. He couldn't be bothered. The other preacher who gave the eulogy has been at the church for a week. He had no idea who my grandmother was, and while he did the best he could, that other guy should have made the trip IMO. Please excuse typos. On mobile. Okay. First, some context. We're Orthodox Christians in my country. I'm not too religious myself, but I was more so when I was a kid. People here in general are not too religious in the literal meaning of the word, but our religion is a part of our culture and everyday lives. It's a little bit weird, but folks literally equate our Orthodox Christianity with our nationality and patriotism. So there's this super famous historic monastery near my hometown that gets visitors from all over the world, from all religions. It's mostly famous basically because unexplained things have happened there. Religious folks see these as miracles, but there have been quite a few scientists, researchers, historians, etc. trying to look into these unsolved mysteries. So many people go there every year. I've gone there quite a few times, even up to recently, mostly because it's a great hiking path. But out of all these times, I remember this one instance so vividly and still with such feelings of discomfort. I was so young. I know it was in the late 90s because I was wearing these plastic chokers that were a craze in those days. I had these plastic thingies even around my wrists and fingers. Loved them. So we enter this small tomb-like chapel of the monastery where the bones of the monastery saint are still kept. People come to these because the aforementioned saint was believed to do miracles himself. We wait our cue. Me and my mom walk up, cross our hearts, pay our respects, and then this priest approaches me. Now this priest I don't remember his face or anything, but he looked so big and dark to the little me. He just stepped up to us, towering over me, literally ripped all the accessories off of me, accused me of wearing Satan's things and threw it all out the window and down the cliffs. I was terrified. I couldn't have been older than 7 years old at the time. I felt violated. The way he entered my personal space and ripped my belongings off of me. I was also a bit scared and traumatized. When I think back on it, almost 20 years later, I can feel the exact same feeling I felt as a child. If he hadn't been a priest and so wildly venerated just because he is one, my mom would have sent his ass flying down those cliffs. But she just squeezed my hand, furious, and we left. She was quite shaken too. I suppose because she realized what the simple experience had done to me. Bro, what a super jerk that guy was. It seems like he should have just yelled at you and that would have been traumatizing and mean enough. But the fact that he threw all your stuff that he called Satan's things down the cliffs, seems like that would have been disrespectful to the sacred place he was trying to defend. Thou shalt not steal. A teen at church got pregnant. No, they kicked her out of the membership. Didn't let her come to that church anymore. Basically shunned her. These were people she had known for years. Terrible. I knew a church that had the opposite problem. The youth leaders were my stepsister and her husband, whom she lived with for 10 years before they married, and she got pregnant in high school, so they already didn't have a good example for teens to start with. Their teen group was pretty small. Roughly 5-6 girls and 4-5 guys. Within a year and a half of my stepsister running the group, all of the girls were pregnant. Most of them by guys in the group. I don't know how it happens because all teen activities have to have another non-related adult be at all meetings, outings. Since they all went to same school, it could have happened there or anywhere outside of church. It does look suspicious when every girl in your group all of a sudden gets pregnant. That did ask her to step down from that role by the time the third girl got knocked up. That happened to me, except it wasn't pregnancy. The youth pastor started being really inappropriate and I told one of the church elders. Because I sometimes spent the night at an older male friend's house. He was also a church attendee. Everyone blamed me and I was shunned for causing drama. After their disgusting youth group seminar on dating and homosexuality, I'd had enough. I left and didn't come back. Pastor's kid chiming in. Not the worst thing I can think of, but it still boils my blood. We had a family that would constantly send emails to everyone in the church, except my family, stating that my father should divorce my mom after almost 20 years of marriage because his marriage was getting in the way of serving the congregation in the church. This happened when I was 15 and my sisters were preteens. Mind you, this was a Baptist church. Music director's kid here. There's always one person that's like that. Although I haven't encountered one that encouraged divorce before. I had a huge crush on my music director's kid at church. Too bad we were both dudes. Ooh whoops. Ted Haggard. Nuff said. Mega church pastor got caught by his wife cheating with a church employee whose wedding he performed a few years earlier. What makes this even worse is that the wife was well known for leading a how to be a good wife class. I went to one and it boiled down to duck him no matter what. Pregnant? Menstruating? Get creative, ladies. Her words. Not mine. Guess it didn't work. Same pastor as above before the scandal claiming homosexuality was a type of demonic possession. But Jesus loves you. Different pastor refused to end the service until X people gave $200 each to the building fund. She said she didn't care if it was your last dime. God would bless you for your obedience. At a teen service, we were given a chart about the progression of physical intimacy. Like mouth to mouth, hand to breast. We were then told to circle how far we've gone. Then pray for forgiveness. Different teen service. Guy got called up on stage in front of 200 people and asked if he masturbated. Before he could respond, the pastor pat him on the back and said, "I know you've been good. See, it's important we have accountability partners to help us stay pure. I'm pretty much agnostic now." Different pastor refusing to end the service until X people gave $200 each to the building fund. She said she didn't care if it was your last dime. God would bless you. What are they gonna do? Lock the doors? Have fun fighting those false imprisonment and extortion charges. Capital W. Capital T. Capital F. Well, I didn't witness it in person, but it was in national news here in Croatia. A priest raped a boy. Worst thing is that it happens every few months. It makes it to news. What really sucks about that is that the event likely happens much more frequently. It is discovered somewhat more often and makes the news every few months equals. What sucks even more is that churches that house and defend these rapists are still allowed to function. Look at this thread. Every second post is about a priest being a child molester. Everyone from the RCC to Orthodox to Jehovah's Witnesses have their own pedophilia scandals. Yet in reality, barely anything is done. Bull Mayor said something about how if a cult acted like that, they'd all be arrested by the FBI. Yet because they're huge churches and raping thousands, nobody does anything. The principal of my Christian school chased a recently outed as gay man off the property with a gun in front of the entire school of children. This is my second post in the thread, and I've already thought of a couple more. I need to step away. Holy hit. Did the principal ever give public reasoning for why he did it? For example, I was protecting the kids from molestation or some BS like that. What happened to the principal after? They kind of tried to brush it under the rug and lie about it. He's still principal. He's also nearly illiterate and was my English teacher. It's such a wonder that I have any critical thinking skills at all. Went to a non-denominational megachurch that had a couple of scandals. One of the youth pastors was a pedophile, but I don't think the pastor knew, as the church was too big and so there was a problem with accountability. One of the deacons also shot his mother in an argument. I was in the children's service when the youth preacher told us to burn anything we have that is witchcraft, Harry Potter and trying else related to it. A lot of bad hit, but the one that aggravates me the most is when a youth leader who is a young woman said that girls were to blame for getting raped because they dressed indecently. I walked out of that church and never went back. I got told this a lot at church as a kid. Was also told that it was better to die defending yourself than to survive a rape. And if you were raped, no one would want to marry you because you were a licked cupcake that no one could possibly want. Duck all that. A. I would definitely eat a licked cupcake. B. People are not cupcakes. Church camp. Not church. Article. He was everyone's favorite counselor and one of the few year-round employees of the camp. It wasn't until after his arrest that many came forward with stories. It was heartbreaking. The whole town was staggered. Edit. He is serving 2 life sentences plus 30 years from crimes including forced sodomy and molestation. An untold number of boys came forward, reporting incidents that spanned almost a decade. The only thing I ever personally heard about before the whole thing was exposed was a game of strip horse basketball, which, to a stupid, shelter 10-year-old, sounded more risque than criminal. You wanna put some information in your comment there? Yup. Sorry. If you've seen The Keepers on Netflix, there's a part where they talk about a man named Father Francis Maluli who negotiated with victims of sexual abuse at the hands of pastors in the Diocese of Baltimore. He basically tried to buy silence from them to protect the diocese. In 2012, he was Bishop Francis Maluli, and he confirmed me. So, that asshole. He's the worst thing I've encountered at church. I watched the documentary thinking it would be mildly interesting. It was greatly disturbing and upset me a lot. I had trouble talking about what happened in that show. I don't think I ever finished the last 2 episodes. That's terrifying that you grew up around him. Did you know these things at the time, or did you learn about it when you were older / because of the documentary? I only found out because of the documentary. I had that initial exciting reaction of oh hey I know that guy, which quickly faded to a feeling of oh no. Hadn't been to church in decades, but my girlfriend's family wanted us to go for Easter. There was a new priest at this church out in Dunkirk, NY, because apparently the last dude was accused of diddling 2 kids, so the priest had to extend the sermon to tell us what happened and to pray that the accusers retract their statements. Was super weird. Similar to my problem. The priest was accused of diddling a number, like, enough to be a big deal. The next week at Sunday school, the nuns had went in and told us all about Satan, and that anyone who accused the priest of doing this to them was guaranteed to burn in hell for all eternity for not letting a good man like that molest them. One is enough to be a big deal. My church was having a cake walk. It's a game where you can win a cake. I decided to make some cakes, but the church was out of tall cake boxes, but they did have shorter pie boxes. I'm an amazing baker, so I decided I'll make shorter cakes from scratch using organic, local in season produce. I made these beautiful peach cakes with homemade cream cheese frosting and brought them to the cake walk. The bitch running the cake walk didn't want my cakes because they weren't tall enough and said this to me. Like, Jesus, just take the cakes and don't use them when I leave. Peach cake with cream cheese frosting sounds splendid. As a child, I went to a church where the pastor gave sermons on the sin of homosexuality. I am not straight. This was miserable for me. And then his oldest son came out and told his family he was gay. Literally the following Sunday, that pastor had a sermon where he cried to the church about the fact that his son was going to hell and had everyone join in a prayer that God would fix him. This was horrifying for me. But it's sickening to think of how painful it must have been for his son to have opened up and then have been made into a public spectacle of shame. Religion is the sole reason my parents will never know I'm gay. It disgusts me how churches can happily destroy relationships and hurt people like this. Had an old pastor get arrested for molesting a minor and possession of child pornography. He always gave me the creeps growing up. A hat war. Religious Jewish men must always wear a hat or a kippah while in Jerusalem. And we were visiting a church while on a field trip there. School field trip. Not voluntary. And of course a man can't wear a hat in church. Long story short, our whole class was thrown out of the church. You'd think a church in Jerusalem would be understanding about that. The Catholic Orthodox tradition of men not wearing hats in church actually predates the late medieval Jewish custom of wearing the kippah. Specifically, it was Rabbi Joseph Caro's teaching on Shabbos 118b. A church I used to attend was celebrating this woman deserting her family for her faith, cheering her on and just telling everyone how inspirational it was. And then later the same woman made a speech about how Hinduism was an evil religion. The ducking disrespect from everyone there. I got up and left and never went back. Thanks for watching and be sure to subscribe to RedditQueen for the best daily content.